it's time for questions. Just one thing though, as a member of the Ulster History Circle, we have put up the Demi Wolf Prize again.
Please over the back.
Sorry.
We'll take this one. We'll take those. Yes. Go on. There's two back there. Sorry.
Yes.
So in terms of like almost like a socio-linguistic universal of remembering the truth, there's an author called Joshua McCain, who's a very marginalised figure, 1900 to 1990, wrote for 15 years, and his last book was Mavala Cain, My Own Way. And it's a Gaelic proverb, being a near in the shadow, the truth is, it's very old, you get it in Greek, Alethean Skelly. It's a very old, but he took this proverb, and he was a very marginalised man, and he said, they say the truth is bitter, but believe me, it's not bitter, it's harsh, and that's the reason why it's avoided. So I think that, there is this, he puts his finger really on what people choose to remember or to selectively forget. So I just think it would be a very useful quote for some of your...
Very good. Thank you for that, Doctor. But I will pick on one thing I will say here. There's a whole tradition, by the way, which I tried to touch on this book in different ways. There have been attempts to write about 98 of the North in Irish.
Yes.
And been very interesting attempts from different people. And this has also been a project which has alienated certain people. Because this was, of course, heavily endorsed. One of the most remarkable things of the early Irish state, the Irish Free State originally, and then afterwards with ERA, was to encourage publishing in Irish. And they translated some of the books which were written in English, in Ulster Scots dialect, into Irish. So books like Birmingham's book, there's a famous book, The Northern Ireland, great novel, about 1700, full of complexities, was translated into Irish. Not that anybody couldn't read it in English down south, but it was translated into Irish. And that is a statement in itself, which works on different levels, but also alienated people as seen as a sign of kind of irredentism, of the South claiming a northern heritage. So this works on different levels, which have to be unpacked as well. So every step you take, it's a minefield. As a historian, I want to see how oral traditions develop with time, including stories which are here now. But I don't accept the stories which are here now as if they were just, they passed from time immemorial. Stories constantly change. New material is added. Stories are lost. And I want to follow this story. So when I hear a story now, I now have enough material to be able to trace when that story first appeared. What's new in that story? What was changed? What is being accentuated? So you need to follow this process. And this is remarkable. This is where actually Ulster, Northern Ireland, and Ulster and Northern Ireland are not the same, of course. Where here in the north, there's something unique historiographically, which you don't find in other places, and it's very rare in the world in many ways. Ireland has a rich tradition of oral tradition, all over Ireland. You can collect stories today and in the past. The Irish Folklore Commission did it in the 1930s. It's a very important, it's a country which has a rich oral tradition, even today in the age of phones or whatever, it's still here in different media. But Ulster has something unique. Ulster was always the most literate of counties. This might be exactly the Protestant influence on Ulster, by the way. You can think where that comes from. But both Catholic and Protestant communities were always the most literate. Outside of Dublin, this has always had high literacy, the highest literacy rates in Ireland. So, there's an interplay here which is very strong between written material and oral traditions. Every 10 years or so, when I began looking at it, first I thought there's no sources to do this study. Every 10 years or so, every decade and a half more or less, somebody traveled through Ulster, somebody local, collected oral traditions on 1798. So people wrote down their memoirs after the rebellion and hid them. People traveled through the area and wrote it down. A generation later, a local priest might have collected it, or the minister, or a traveler who comes in, or an antiquarian, time and time again. And all the way through till the time, like you're saying now, you can still collect stories from people. So when you put this on a time chart, which is what I do as an historian, right? I have to place my sources where they came from. Suddenly I have historiography. I can see how this developed through time. And that's remarkable. I can't think of any other society at the moment where you can, with this kind of resolution, follow the story of folk history over 2 centuries in such great resolution, in such detail. And that's remarkable. So by all means, collect stories now, but if you collect them without the context of what happens before, you're missing something. Anything can be told to you. And of course, a lot of the stories we'll collect now are stories that people read, exactly things which were collected 100 years ago. Quite often somebody will, when the Irish Folklore Commission was collecting, there was a famous collector, Michael J. Murphy, who collected different areas. Michael J. Murphy, it's remarkable to look at his stories. Some of the stories were stories which were told to him, pure folklore, oral tradition. Other stories were stories that people had read. In Northern Ireland, there was a certain kind of envy at the success of the Irish Folklore Commission, and seen as a kind of Gaelic Irish nationalist project. So there was an attempt to do a similar thing here. In Cultra, you can find the notebooks of that. Only 2 traditions of 98 are found in all the notebooks. There's a problematic topic. One of them is word for word copied from a sermon given in that same community, Grace Hill, 2 years earlier. And I know that because I have the sermon. So that's why you need to do all this kind of search and put them together and you can work out the sources. There's another question here, please.
I live in a place called Brown Square, which is about half a minute from here. And it's where Jamie Hope eventually died. And Brown Square would be seen to be a totally loyalist place and has been for the better part of 200 years. I have a question, if you put your outsider's head on, is do you think there would ever be a time where the blue plaque of where Jamie Hope actually died to be put up in Brown Square, or is that impossible in the future generations?
Great thing about being a historian is I never talk about the future. Therefore, I'm always right. See, I can predict the past with quite good precision. But it already happened in a way. A figure who's now commemorated in the blue plaque, not in Brown Square, outside the Linen Hall, would be the figure to look at, Thomas Carnduff. Thomas Carnduff, the shipyard poet, unionist, member of Orange Order, and being in the, wasn't the B Specials, was one of the other kind of paramilitaries at the time, and yet was fascinated by Jamie Hope. Goes around exactly to these neighborhoods and looks at this kind of, and there's a period we can do this, right? In the 1930s, it's not popular, but he can write about it because there's a kind of, it's a working class area. He can exactly write about him as a working class hero. In his play Castlereagh, he writes about Castlereagh, and Castlereagh's kind of the aristocracy versus James Hope. So in a way, it's not a blue plaque, but that's an attempt to bring this narrative out. And there's a moment where it could have happened. Theatre was more radical in the past. Experiments had been taken. Something is more not radical now, but there was 2 different moments in Ulster Theatre which are very interesting, where these plays come out. So there were moments like that. Will that happen again? It depends on changing circumstances. The moment it's a time of closing it, isn't it? There was this kind of opening up in 1998 where it seemed that everything was possible. Communities that hadn't celebrated 1798, everybody rushed to jump on the commemoration bandwagon, if you wish. But a few years later, it quickly tightened down. And you can actually see how it's tightening down. If you follow the newspapers, very quickly it happened. And therefore, we really don't know the future, because the commentators, and people would remember that, and you exactly documented what was happening. The feeling was in 1998, I just came to Ireland as a student, was that that's it, forgetting is over. Everything now is out in the open. The memory is there to stay. But you'll never know how it will change afterwards. This tightening came afterwards, and very quietly, it was never announced. So that is what I have to say as a comment for the moment. Brown Square. Please.
Jan, you mentioned about us stumbling forward in some ways, trying to reconcile our difficult recent history with the Troubles. Would you agree with my thought that one way that has been very well addressed in literature and in writing is the book Lost Lives? I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think it's a monumental work to try and reconcile our past simply by telling the truth about how every person died in the Troubles and giving each story equal weight as much as possible.
Lost Lives is brilliant in every way. It's a book that I keep in my office all the time. When it comes to United Irishmen, that was part of the struggle. 1898, the centenary, was a struggle. And it's a struggle again and again at different times. Who's leading it? What are the politics? Sometimes the struggle is not between Unionists and Nationalists. It can be between Nationalists and Nationalists. It can be between Nationalists and Republicans. What message are we broadcasting here? There's messages, Carmel has written about this in the past. There's messages where you can read very clear messages of Republicans in the late 18th century, which are more similar to social democratic values now.
Well, the man of the hour, and look who's here with us as well. It's like a reunion. It's brilliant. Great to see you. Great to see you.